On October 31st in 1986 in Kent, Washington, Joseph Cooper and his friend Stu Ruiz were home alone watching a movie when they were interrupted by a strange visitor. What they thought to be just a harmless game from a trick-or-treater soon revealed itself to be something far more sinister. This peculiar child at the door, whom they were so quick to overlook, inflicted them two horrific events that still, to this day, continue to heavily impact upon Joseph's life. It was Halloween night and my mom had given me a choice. I could either take my 8-year-old twin brothers trick-or-treating, or I could stay home and answer the door to trick-or-treaters. At 17 years old, the thought of being dragged around my neighborhood full of bratty hyper kids sounded like hell. Answering the door was in my mind. It was the lesser of two evils. My mom gave me a load of instructions. Answer the door every time it knocks, say Happy Halloween, hand out 1 piece of candy per child, and so on. I nodded along to her, only half paying attention, and then I watched through the window as she hurried up the path after my brothers, both of them dressed as characters from Ghostbusters. About 1 minute later, there was a knock on the door. As I opened it, a guy in this Gremlins monster mask leaped out at me and shouted boo. I hit his arm and I rolled my eyes at him. It was my friend, Stu. I told him how lame his mask was, but he laughed and he waved his VHS of The Nightmare on Elm Street at me. Ignoring my mom's instructions, I placed the bowl of candy on the doorstep, wanting to watch the movie undisturbed by bratty kids. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. I had no idea that by making this choice, I was subjecting me and my friend to our own nightmare, the ramifications of which would stay with us forever. We were about halfway through the movie when I heard these 3 thuds on the door. It must have been loud, as we had the volume up on high and we still heard it. Thinking it was just some annoying kids messing around, I ignored it. I'd left the candy bowl out if they weren't happy with that. That wasn't my problem. We carried on watching the movie, but then there was another 3-thudded knock, and then another one, and another, always in bouts of 3. I took Stu's gremlin monster mask off the coffee table. I stuck it over my head. And then I stomped over to the door, intent on giving those kids who were pestering me a fright. I swung open the door, and with a roar, I stuck my hands out in front of me. I stared down, and I saw this short kid standing on the doorstep. He didn't as much as flinch on seeing me. He just stared up at me with this vacant expression. He looked about 9 or 10, and his face was covered in what I presumed to be dried up fake blood. It was smudged around his eyes, and in his hair. He didn't seem to have a proper costume on. He was just in these scruffy, loose-fitting overalls that were held up at the waist by a piece of pretend barbed wire. I pulled my mask up and I said, "Hey, kid, what do you want?" He pointed to the empty candy bowl on the step, and then he looked at me, his unfaltering gaze on his face. I was about to tell him that if the candy had gone, then it was too bad. But there was something off about this kid. It was also strange that he didn't seem to have a parent or any other kids with him. I told him, "Wait there," and then I went inside to find some candy. When I went back, he was just standing there waiting. And I noticed that he didn't have a bucket or anything like that to put his candy in, so I just held it out to him, and he looked at it, but he didn't move, so I said, "Kid, do you want it or no?" He snatched it off me, stuck the candy in his overall pockets, which I saw had candy in them, and then turned and scurried off. As I watched him walk up the path, I saw him look over his shoulder at me, at least 5 or 6 times. Something about that kid gave me the shivers. I refilled the candy bowl so we wouldn't be disturbed again, and then I went back into the living room. Stu asked me who it was, and I tried to sound unfazed as I told him it was just some weird kid wanting candy. As we continued watching the movie, I couldn't shake that thought of that weird kid out of my head. I don't know. I just had this uneasy feeling about him. One I couldn't explain. I told myself he was just some kid and I was being stupid, but my uneasy feeling still would not shift. When the 3 knocks sounded from the front door, I almost fell off my seat. Stu laughed at me. I think he thought the movie had freaked me out. When another 3 thudded knock sounded, he said he would go answer it. So he grabbed his monster mask and he took a handful of candy out of our snack bowl on the coffee table, and when minutes passed by and he hadn't returned still, I paused the film and I shouted, "Stu, are you okay?" This long, high-pitched shriek echoed through the house and it made me curse as I leaped to my feet. I grabbed the closest thing that could be used as a weapon, Mom's brass ornamental elephant, and I aimed it above me as I crept toward the door. It was wide open, a gust of wind causing it to sway, and there were blown leaves across the floor. I called Stu's name as I took small steps forward, and then, with my heart thudding in my chest, I forced myself to look to the side of the house. Someone had leaped out at me and grabbed my arm. I was so freaked out that I almost slammed that ornament into their head. They managed to jump out of the way in time and started laughing so hard it made him snort. It was Stu. He thought it was hilarious, but I was furious with him. He was still laughing as we went back inside, but I stayed there and I stared at the tree line. I could hear the shouts and laughter of kids in the distance, but something just didn't feel right. I blew that jack-o'-lantern out to deter any more visitors, and I locked the door behind me, and I went back into the living room. When I walked in there, Stu was eating candy out of his hand and staring at the frozen screen. I looked around for the remote to unpause the movie, but I couldn't find it anywhere, and I swear, I'd left it at the end of the couch arm, but it wasn't there. So I was checking down the side of the couch when Stu stared past me, his eyes enlarged in fright. I found myself following his gaze, even though I knew he was pranking me again. Standing there, staring at me, was that creepy kid, right there, inside of my house. This was going too far. I asked him what he was doing inside my house, but he didn't say anything. I asked again, and then he just turned, and he scurried through the hallway. I was about to chase after him when I heard Stu. He started making these strange, muffled, wheezing sounds, and I thought he was trying to freak me out again, so I frowned at him. And I was about to tell him, this is not the time. And that's when I saw that he was on his knees, blood dripping down his chin as he desperately tried to pull something out of his mouth. Realizing that he wasn't messing around, I knelt next to him and I asked him what was wrong. With bloody fingers, he pulled something out of his mouth. Listening beneath the slobber of blood was a small piece of glass or something like that. I'm really not sure what it was. I looked at the candy Stu had dropped on the floor next to him. That wasn't the same candy that we'd been eating earlier. But he couldn't talk to me. His mouth was too full of blood to be able to speak. Through my panic, I told him that I'd call for help, and I ran into the kitchen to use the phone. As I picked it up and I tried to dial 911, I didn't hear a dial tone. I shook the phone, but I realized that the cord was cut. And that's when I saw him in the distance, that creepy kid, a hand pressed to his barbed wire belt. The boy looked at me with soulless eyes before he turned and he ran off somewhere inside the house. I grabbed a dish towel and I rushed back to Stu. His hands and mouth were covered in blood, and I didn't know where to press the dish towel to. I told him that we would have to go next door for help, and I tried guiding him out of the house, and then as we reached the door, though, I remembered that I locked it. I thought I'd put the key on the hook on the wall, but it wasn't there. I was desperately patting my pockets when I heard Stu try to splutter out something, but I couldn't make out what it was. I just saw the fear in his eyes, but then that vanished. It was all replaced by a darkness. It's as though Stu became someone else. But I still told him that it would be okay, that I'd get help for him. He remained vacant as he pulled something from behind his back and slammed it into the side of my head. I heard scurrying footsteps and I saw a glimpse of scurrying feet. I tried to piece it all together, but I couldn't. Not before everything went black. When I woke up, the brass elephant statue was next to me, covered in blood. My blood. The front door was wide open and I felt something in my mouth that made me struggle to breathe. And there was this searing pain in my wrists and my ankles, and I looked forward and I saw that creepy boy standing on the front step. He picked a candy bowl up. He pulled candy out of his pockets and he dropped them into the bowl. And then he placed it back down on the doorstep. As I silently screamed at him to stop, my eyes now watering as I choked on the thing lodged in my mouth, I noticed that something had changed about him, that he didn't have his barbed wire belt on. I tried pulling my hands free as I scrambled off the floor and onto my knees, but I couldn't free my arms or my feet, and the pain jolted all around me. That boy looked directly at me with his blood-stained face before he kicked the door. I watched it as it creaked shut. I was unable to stop him. I tried spitting whatever it was out of my mouth. I tried and I tried, but it was as though it was glued in place. My entire mouth felt like it was burning. I spat until that thing seemed to melt, and fruity, iron-tasting, bloody goo oozed out of my mouth. I think it was a giant Jawbreaker candy. Layers of it stuck to my gums and the roof of my mouth, burning in place and unbudging. I screamed for help, a scream combined with burning gums and endless blood. I screamed for no one to take the candy. I screamed for Stu, help me. And then I felt a presence looming over me. I thought it was that kid, that he was back. I looked up. It wasn't the kid. It was Stu. He had blood crusted around his mouth and smudged across his face, blood that I knew in my heart was a mixture of mine and his. He stared down at me, unfaltering, soulless eyes. And then he stepped over me and he left. I watched, powerless, as he scurried off into the night. Joseph's mom returned to find him bound with barbed wire. His mouth was so badly injured, she couldn't make out what he was urgently trying to say. But after that night, Stu Ruiz never returned home, and he is still recorded as a missing person. To this day, Joseph remains convinced that something about that night and that creepy kid somehow altered Stu and changed him forever. Almost 4 decades later, and Joseph is still haunted by what happened to him. Now, with a family of his own, each Halloween he waits just in case that creepy kid or his former friend, in some form or another, chooses that Halloween to return and finish what was started all those years ago. For more scary horror Halloween stories, please subscribe.